Thank you so much again for joining us. And as I said, my name is Leanne Tingay. Yeah, that's still me over there in that photo. A little bit of a change since that photograph was taken. Anyway, I am a senior associate with Community Heart and Soul, and proud to say both my friend and colleague, Jen Denifo.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jen Danifo. Thank you, Leanne. I love working with you. I'm looking forward to today. I am Jen Danifo. I'm Senior Program Officer at the Pennsylvania Humanities Council. I'm also a Heart and Soul coach. I'm currently working with three communities in Pennsylvania: Upper Chichester, which is right outside of Philadelphia; Cameron County, which is in the northwesternish area. Yeah, that's about right. And Dillsburg, which is right outside of Carlisle. And yeah, Leanne, this is where I go through a little bit about PHC, right? I could just roll
There you
forward.
go. Yep. Yep. We're getting
Okay,
started,
great.
kids.
Awesome. Awesome. So excited to see so many of you today here from Pennsylvania and also from across the country. A little bit about Pennsylvania Humanities Council, because you guys may not know us, so I wanted to just introduce you to our organization. Like I said, I work there in the programs department, and primarily what I do is helping with the Community Heart and Soul Partnership. But the organization as a whole, we are one of the only, or the only statewide independent nonprofit in Pennsylvania that is focused on the humanities. We're also one of 56 humanities councils that span the nation and U.S. territories. So all of you out there, most of you out there, I should say, have a humanities council in your neck of the woods, so I encourage you to seek them out. Our biggest supporter is the National Endowment for the Humanities. I always say if you've seen a Ken Burns documentary, then you probably know who the National Endowment for the Humanities is, because they typically fund, the Burns documentaries as well as some other big projects that happen on a national level. Simply put, we put the humanities in action for positive change. We have two programming kind of areas, education and civic engagement, which is where the Community Heart and Soul partnership lies for us. We picked these two areas because we believe they have the most impact on communities and individuals for making, strengthening their lives, basically. And we also do a ton of grant making. We actually just funded a lot of, did some awards for over 100 arts and culture organizations that needed some relief funding through the CARES grant because of the pandemic. So we do a lot of stuff. So, how did we end up in Community Heart and Soul, and, how did the humanities end up in community planning? We get that question a lot. For us, the humanities have always been about the exploration of human experience and using that exploration as a way to better understand ourselves, our communities, and the world around us. And Heart and Soul, Community Heart and Soul is exactly that. The process allows communities to dig deeper into their histories, their own culture, their own experiences. And, we, along with Community Heart and Soul, recognize that residents' understanding of their own lives makes them exceptionally suited to plan for their own futures and solve problems and recognize assets that they have. So our partnership with Community Heart and Soul is rooted in this shared belief, and it started in 2015. We were doing a strategic plan, and we were looking at the civic engagement area, and one of our consultants introduced us to the great team at Community Heart and Soul, and the rest, as we say, is history. We've seen impacts in Pennsylvania and everything from, Heart and Soul has impacted zoning and planning and using arts and culture. Someone just mentioned this in the chat as a way to help with bringing residents out and being a part of that process. On this slide here, you'll see that since 2015, we started with 3 pilot communities, and we've grown to 10. We're really proud of that and really excited about the communities across Pennsylvania that are doing Heart and Soul. And I welcome you to go to pahumanities.org to read about our work and those communities. One last thing I want to mention is that we do have a lot of partnerships in Pennsylvania. We're really proud of this. We work with 2 really great state agencies, the Department of Community and Economic Development, as well as the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. Both of them have been huge supporters of Heart and Soul. We could not fund. We also, help provide funding to the communities to do Heart and Soul in Pennsylvania, and these 2 organizations have helped us do that, so we're so thankful to them. In addition, we work with PCA, the Pennsylvania Council on the Arts, and some other smaller local organizations to help get the word out. And of course, our partnership with Community Heart and Soul is amazing. I work very closely with Leanne and all the folks at Community Heart and Soul, and we we just love them, are indebted to them for what we've been able to do in Pennsylvania. Today you'll hear some of those stories. So I'm going to invite Leanne back so we can get things rolling.
Hey, yes, thanks, Jen. And yes, we've been working with you guys since, what, 2015? So it's just been a great time here. So, all right, let's do just a quick recap because some of you may be joining us for the first time. This is our third in our 5-part workshop series. So, first of all, what is Community Heart and Soul? Very, very quickly and briefly, it is been field tested and built for towns and small cities. It's not cookie cutter. It is not your typical planning process. It is something that you're going to do face-to-face, resident to resident. And why they're doing that is because they're pulling out those stories. And filled within those stories is data. So it's very much a data-driven process. And it's also action-oriented because when people get involved with the way that as a community they make decisions, then they want to see those decisions come about. Something you're going to hear me say over and over again, the more you touch it, the more you own it. And that is basically what Community Heart and Soul is all about. Now, we are currently in 19 states, and we are working with, goodness, over 80 communities, and probably by the end of the year, we're going to be in close to 100. So we're so excited to be across the country. We started out field testing this in the Rocky Mountain West and in northern New England. But as you can see, we've spread all over the country, and we are super excited about all the wonderful small towns and cities that we've been working with. All right, so how does this all fold together? Well, Heart and Soul is based on 3 founding principles. What matters most, involve everyone, which is what we're going to really be focusing on today, and play the long game. What we mean by that is, this is not a flash in the pan type of thing. This is something that could help you change the way your community does business. And we're hoping that what results are stronger, better, more robust economic development plans, municipal plans, comp plans, community development plans. How does nonprofits work better together, and so forth. It's a 4-phase process. The first phase, Imagine, is setting the works in action and helping the community to see, gee, what does success actually look like for us? The second phase is Connecting. That's where you're sharing stories, gathering stories, and listening to stories for data, where at the end you're going to create something called your Heart and Soul Statement. Then next into phase 3 is Action, is planning. And you're going to be taking all the data that you had gotten from these stories and help build an action plan. And phase 4 is, let's get it done. It is the action part of this very action-oriented way of going about doing business in your community. So that, we see 5 basic things, and I know that Jen can tell you some stories about these as well. We see new leaders and volunteers come out because we are talking about involving everyone. This means finding not just the usual suspects, those that truly have been part of your community and do so much for it, but also those folks that are hidden and missing and don't know that they belong and don't know that they have a seat at the table. I always like to say it's not about who's at the table, but where are you taking the table? And when that happens, you start to see new leaders and new volunteers. And if you've ever been in an organization and you're saying to yourself, I just wish that we had more people involved, this may be one way of starting to build that volunteer force. Second, trust is built because you're starting to break down silos and you're bridging divides. Downtowns are re-energized. I was in a program called Main Street for nearly 20 years. For those of you who don't know what that is, it's downtown revitalization and economic development with a historic preservation ethic. And why I feel like this works so well with that is oftentimes we have a very myopic look at our downtowns. It's well, gee, the community needs to support us. But where are you within the community structure? And Heart and Soul helps you to see, and for the community to see, what are the assets within downtown that they love. And it's done in such a way that it's clean data for both the downtowns to utilize, but also to start strategizing on how they can become a stronger force within the community. And of course, his history and culture are honored, and I know the humanities plays a huge part in that. Jen's going to have all kinds of great stories for you on that. And pride is restored. It's when you start focusing on what matters most and sharing that within the community, others start to realize, yeah, these are great assets. I forgot how great our town is. All right, we're in the middle of a pandemic. How do we do this face-to-face, resident-to-resident stuff? Well, we have to be a little more creative. One of the things that you'll also hear me say is, I don't like the phrase socially isolate or social distancing, because I feel like more than ever, right now, we need to be socially connected. But what we do need to do is be safe and follow the CDC guidelines, which means we need to physically distance ourselves. Follow those rules, wear the masks. You can still connect utilizing things like Zoom or even a platform like we're utilizing right now, Adobe Connect. We've done work with both. And you can still see each other, you can talk, you can share, you can get each other's stories, you can connect in those ways. But I love what they did, for example, in that top left photo in Ambridge, Pennsylvania. They went out to their various parks in their community, and they just wanted to know, hey, what's your wish for Ambridge? What do you want us to be? And they asked people. Now, they were very safe about it. They had a cup of pens that were all sanitized and clean, and then they had another cup where when you use that pen, put it there. They had volunteers that were taking those sanitized wet wipes and making sure that they were clean and safe, making sure you have hand sanitizer, asking people to wear their masks. And then, as you can see, they just put them up on a clothesline and we're sharing them. You could do the same type of thing tomorrow with a whiteboard. Do you still have a farmer's market that meets? Do you have parks in your community, places where people gather? You could bring that whiteboard out with a simple question like, what do you love about your community? Do the same thing, keep everybody safe, and it's amazing the answers that people will say. It makes everyone start to feel really, really good. And finally, even gathering those stories, you can still do that. You can see in a community in Maine where they kept everybody physically distanced, but they still were able to connect. They were still able to have a great time, gather stories, gather data. It's awesome, awesome. So what I would like to invite you all to do is that if you have not seen our first two workshops, we will have those on video for you, and you can view them, you can share them with other members of your community, and hopefully you will learn something and perhaps be inspired to adopt the practice of community heart and soul. As I said, we have our Getting Started workbook that you can download, and all of it has some step-to-step instructions on everything that we're going to be doing today. And if you have additional questions, you can email us at info@communityheartandsoul.org. So, with that. All right, last week we went through the 5 elements of interest, of readiness within the community. Community interest, community leadership, relationships, and community culture, and resources. And what you'd see within the workbook is that we have a way for you to start community conversations about these topics to see what the strengths are, what the opportunities might be, and how you can basically start to come together and realize that how do we start talking about our community in these terms. So again, all of that is within the workbook. Now, we've gone through several of these kind of getting started milestones. First one was learn about and engage interest in community heart and soul. And next was inventory and explore community strengths, assets, and opportunities. And today we're going to be doing some work on identifying formal and informal groups in your community and the connections between them. This is where we talk about involving everyone. All right. Now, there was a reason why we asked you when you came in about the different clubs and organizations that you currently belong to. And it was great. We saw a wide variety and the difference between formal and informal. For example, we saw some that had, connections to formal organizations like Rotary and some were like neighborhood works, but also some informal ones too, like book clubs and so forth. So, but what I would ask you is this. As you start looking around and seeing how your community works, and I know that many of you who are on this call today are people who are very involved in your communities, or you work for organizations that do various things within your community. But who's missing? When you've been to these different clubs and organizations, who's missing? It's finding those hidden and missing voices and understanding perhaps the barriers that are keeping them from coming and being a part of things is what we want to start exploring. So I'm going to ask you a question. And you can just put it down here in the participant chat. Think about the last public meeting that you attended or conducted. Who is missing from it? Go ahead. Put it in there into the chat, because I'd love to see what you think. I have a colleague that was at a school board meeting, and it was like 9 o'clock at night, and there was someone in the audience very angry. Why aren't there more parents here? Well, because it was 9 o'clock at night, and they were probably home with their kids. So it's great. Seniors, working mothers, young people, yes, minority citizens, absolutely. Law enforcement, interesting. Essential workers, yep. Students, young adult, working professionals, different demographics not represented. Minority groups, yep. Residents, yeah. Our Latino community, absolutely.
Renters, that's a big one.
Yep. Absolutely. You guys are hitting it. You're hitting it right on the head. And some of those are missing voices in a lot of the work that you're doing. And it's not that they don't want to be involved. Many of them either feel like, do I belong there? And others, it may simply be there's access to transportation issues. There might be the time that you're holding the meeting is not convenient for them. Maybe it's something as simple as childcare. They're a single mom, and they can't afford a babysitter, and they don't feel like bringing their 3-year-old to a city council meeting. So, what are some of the things that we could be doing to make it possible for some of them? Like I said, it's not about oftentimes having that meeting and expecting people to come to you. Not who's at the table. It's where are you taking the table so more people can be around it. So, yes. All right, Jen, we're going to get started here. Going to get going on some exercises. Now, first thing, and as I said, this is step-by-step in the workbook. We call this Who Lives, Works, and Plays in Your Community. Now, this is what one community did during this exercise. And what I want you to notice here, this was from Hamilton, New Jersey, the different groups in that center, not the sticky notes around, but the names of things around it. That's what I would call either large groups or networks. You can see government, you can see schools, you can see, looks like religious organizations. You can see, looks like veterans, healthcare, there's government, and so forth. And those would be those big networks within your community. And you may be a larger community, you may be a very small one. But I'm going to guarantee you have one or two at least of these networks. Maybe it's a school system, maybe it's government, and so forth. So, I don't know. Jen, any thoughts on this? All righty. Oh, Jen, I think are you on mute? Couldn't hear you. Ah, there you go.
Sorry about that. I think you covered it. One thing I will say as we're previewing this activity and we're transitioning into having our participants be a part of it. I think the idea here is to think expansively about the different groups, because I think there are a lot of discoveries that can happen during this process, which we'll talk about.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean, throw anything against the wall and just see what happens, because all of it starts conversation.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, all right, what we'd like you to do right now, because we want to make this interactive and fun, guys, is identify those big networks within your community. What are those big, broad groups? So we gave you some examples in that Hamilton one. What have you got in your community? All right. So identify, veterans, yep. Nonprofit organizations, absolutely. Young families. Newcomers into town, yep. Soccer clubs. Now some of these we're looking at, this is great. You're looking at perhaps both the smaller groups within the larger networks. So for example, you might have business or economy that could include business owners, downtown businesses, and so forth. So think in those larger groups. There you go. Arts and cultural organizations. Excellent. Yep. Yep. Perfect, guys. Yes.
This is great.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, and save some of those answers. They'll nest underneath some of those larger groups.
Some of those larger groups. So it's important to think about the difference between the two. The larger groups, which might be nonprofit, and then what are the smaller groups that would be underneath it. In fact, let's show you a little bit. If you were to be doing this exercise, and hopefully you're going to be brave enough, you can do this again. You can do this tomorrow. Download the workbook and get with some friends and try it out, and then take it to other parts in your community. All you need is some flip chart paper, okay? And on the top of the flip chart paper is where you're going to list the large networks, like government or education or schools, okay? And the next step is to take sticky notes. What did we ever do before sticky notes is beyond me. They're the greatest tool ever. So on the sticky note, you're going to write down those different organizations, clubs, both formal and informal, that would fit under that network. So that would be the next step. So guys, I see you're still writing. We love it. We're going to move on to the next exercise, okay? Which is identify those subgroups. So we just did 4 that we know most communities, maybe not everybody, has. What's the formal and informal? Yes, Abby, you're right. Rotary, that's perfect for that. Can you think about government? Can you think about, that might be, who is the legislative bodies that are making decisions in your town? Yep, city council of government, so forth. Perfect, guys. Look at you go. Yep, faith-based groups, food pantry. Yep. It could be the first, second, and third Baptist churches you got in your community, or the temple or the mosque. And even think about, under faith-based, some of those have subgroups within them. Maybe they have a youth group or the choir or the singles organization. Yes, I see, the ecumenical groups, the churches, yep, parochial schools, exactly. Look at you guys. Awesome. See, you guys thought of all of these things. Now you get together with your neighbors and see what they may find in some of this. It's amazing what you can end up coming up with. So what do we do next? All right. So you've done a great job in coming up with all these different organizations. And you know what? When you're doing this with friends, you're doing this with different groups, a lot of you are going to name the same ones. That's okay. Just group them together. It's like, okay, 5 of you came up with Rotary. Great. No problem. But also encourage them to think about what we would call informal groups as well. So maybe it's the book clubs. Maybe it is the group of ladies, like I'm laughing about saying, yeah, if we go to a yoga class and then we go out for, pizza and adult beverage afterwards. But those groups actually do play a role within your communities, because within them there's connectors. So what you would do, and I'm going to go back a couple of slides so you can see what we're talking about here. Once you have people put up on those sticky notes the names of different groups, both formal and informal. So under healthcare, you can see they put a whole bunch of different groups under there. What you would do next is think about who you know, even if they're not your best friend, but somebody that you know, a name that might be connected to that group. So someone had, I think it was Abby, who said Rotary. You know, it's like, who do you know within the Rotary Club? You don't have to put the name down here for, someone's privacy. But that's what the next step would be, is who are those connectors to that? So, yes, it's being able to say, then how do they connect, just like this illustration is, to the different people within your community? So, Jen, I know you have an observation on this and kind of a real-life story with it.
Yeah, and I want to give a shout out to Alice Trowbridge, who's one of our coaches, who is, I think, on the call today. But she pointed this out so eloquently. Last night we did a training with the folks in Ambridge, PA, which is on the western end of the state, and she did this slide. And one of the things she mentioned is that if you look at this slide, so the idea is that, here we're talking about our communities are networked, right? There are different networks, whether formal or informal, that kind of tie people together. And when you're thinking about, it's one thing to think about the groups, but then it comes down to that individual relationship, right? And there should be some relationships in the community that you'll be able to draw on, whether you have your own or you know people that know people that know people. And in this, I love this image. So here we have a bunch of different people that are connected to some of the big groups that you guys just unpacked a little bit with us. Looking at the under and represented or missing voices category, like Leanne said earlier, this is a really important part of Heart and Soul, and really I think what makes it different is the intentionality of thinking about who is not always at the table, or who are we not always bringing the table to, in a better way of saying it. So if you look at Pete, Pete knows Beth, but Pete is the only one that knows Beth. Beth is the only one that knows David, and David is the only one that knows Frank, right? So you may not get to Frank if you don't have that Pete-Beth connection. So I think it's really important to really be intentional when you're going through this process, when you're thinking about the connectors. There may be that one person, and it may not always be the people that are, maybe at the helm of leading the Heart and Soul effort. You might have to get, beyond that network, and that's what Heart and Soul is really about. Yesterday in Ambridge, they talked about, I was saying this earlier before folks logged on, there's a monk in Ambridge who doesn't speak a ton of English, but he loves to walk, and he walks one of the neighborhoods in Ambridge. And when we were doing this exercise with the folks in Ambridge, one of the women said, I forget the man's name, he had the monk who walks, the walking monk, is the guy who knows everybody, and we have to talk to him because he probably knows a lot of folks that are not formally connected to the rest of the community. So, yeah, I think, this is such a great exercise. Starts a lot of conversation about who lives, works, and plays in your community, and really, as you'll see, helps you think about how to get out to them and how to build relationships with them.
Yep, absolutely. And you have to do this with more than one group of people, because they're going to come up with different names and different connectors. And kind of the secret and the sauce with Heart and Soul is that it's not going to be everybody that's on the kind of Heart and Soul team as much as it is who do we need to connect with in our community to get to underrepresented voices and really listen to their stories. I'm looking at some of the stuff that's being said in the chat, and it's true, Emma. You're right. There's not necessarily this group of formal or informal people that are part of that, but maybe somebody there is going to give you that access to get inside and be able to understand who those people are and how do we connect with them. And you know what? You may not be the right person. I may not be the right person, but that's why you want a connector, because that's where trust is going to happen. Trust may not be built with me, for example, but it might be with somebody else within the community. So, for example, with Frank, that's perfect. So, at any rate, yeah. I think, did we have one more? Oh, no, we don't. Okay, sorry, because you've got a great story about just this topic.
I know, and you said relationships, and I was like, oh, great segue. So this is the team in Upper Chichester. Upper Chichester, Pennsylvania, and again, they're right outside of Philadelphia. They have it's a larger community, still under 50,000, which is within the heart and soul kind of parameters. But they have, and it's a diverse community in terms of race and ethnicity, income level, and it's also like the one great thing about this community is that Philly, Delaware, and New Jersey are all like really close. Like they're right on 95. So it's just a really interesting community. So this is a picture of parts of their team, the team that's doing Heart and Soul. They're in about phase 3 now. And recently they collected a bunch of stories from people and sat down with people and asked them what matters most. And what they heard was that there were some segments, particularly the African-American population, that didn't feel fully heard in that process. It didn't feel like folks were really, again, bringing the table to them. So two of the members of the team, Angie, who has the hat on, and Diane, who has the white sweater on, said, we need to go out to these neighborhoods. There's 3 different housing complexes that a lot of African Americans live in, and that was the voice they were hearing. You guys you're not doing your job. We don't feel heard, and we're a little distrustful right now of what's happening. So they went out there and they did some block parties, and the way that they did the block parties were that they connected with one of the informal leaders in one of the neighborhoods or one of the housing developments. Her name was Miss Barbara, and everybody said, if you're going to do an event in this development, you have to let's talk to Miss Barbara, and start sitting down with her and asking her, build that relationship with her. So they did that, and they were able to do some of those. They were able to do some of those block parties, and it was in the middle of COVID, so it wasn't hugely attended. But some of the feedback that they got is that no one's ever really come to us, to ask us what matters most, and to get our feedback on stuff. And that was really not everything's perfect, right? There's still some issues, but I think it shows that those connectors and then those individuals, those informal or formal leaders in the community can really help bridge that gap between, those that may not necessarily be connected to the process but want to be. So just a great little story in Upper Chichester of how they're trying to bridge those divides and leverage what they learned in their community network analysis, and understanding where people live, work, and play, and who lives in those communities really helped them do that.
Awesome. Yep, I love Upper Chichester. They're such a great community. And it's so true. Not everybody on the team was going to be able to do it, but Angie and Diane and those ladies are so awesome. But yeah, this is truth, and face it, and let's get out there and do something about this. So yeah. All right. So what do you do with all of this information? Okay. Why do we even do all of this? It's so that you can start to think about a strategy, just like what they did in Upper Chichester. And who could we reach out to? And if that's not the right person, maybe they're going to be able to connect you with somebody else that's the right person in there. And how do we discover all the different underrepresented voices in our community, as well as making sure that we are talking to those folks that are the movers and shakers, if you will, the ones that are, the forefront of the community. Because if you don't talk to them, then they become an underrepresented voice. So it's involving everyone, one of our principles. So what you see here is a spreadsheet that we help you create, and we call it our community network analysis. And really what that is a way of starting to plan out, all right, who's in our community, who can connect to with them, how do we engage with them, where do we find them even within our community to know this is the proper strategy we should come up with, listening to those connectors so that you will come up with strategies. You may be a bunch of smart people, and you are, but maybe you don't know everybody, and maybe you don't know exactly how to connect with a different minority, for example, or a different group of people, a different age group even. So what we have is a 6-step system. So you would take all that information that you just gathered from the Who Lives, Works, and Plays exercise, and as you can see on your screen, we would ask you some questions. So for example, you might be looking at, what's this community group, okay? And are they a missing voice? Is there people within there that you don't see at all these different, public meetings or in clubs and so forth. And, does, and is there anything special about this particular group that you might want to notate? And again, this is formal and informal. Then you start looking at your demographics, and that could just simply be, looking at the census. How does your demographics break down within your community? And how did these different groups represent even that? Then step 3, looking at the connectors that you do know, and even the communications, part of step 4. Step 5, how would we engage with them? And even step 6, following through. So no, you're not going to worry about that now. That's actually phase 1 activities. So what I want you guys to all think about doing now is, of course, downloading that workbook guide, getting out there and having fun with the Who Lives, Works, and Plays. Doing it maybe as a porch party, doing it in your backyard, doing it on Zoom, kind of like just like what we just did with you guys, having people identify these things, and you can use, Zoom has whiteboards, Adobe Connect has these different pods you can use. But getting the ideas out there, you can do it on your driveway, for goodness sakes. If you have Rotary, let's say, in your community that's still meeting in person and they're looking for a lunchtime speaker, wouldn't this be a fun activity you could do at the Rotary Club and get everybody thinking about this? So be creative. Take it on the road. And speaking of taking it on the road, Jen, why don't you tell us a story about this?
I love it.
Let me go back again so you all can see. See, that's the formal looking, spreadsheet that we helped create for you. And this is what Upper Chichester created using flip chart paper. So Jen, tell us the story.
Again, back to that Upper Chichester group that I just showed, they really took this to heart. And again, they're in phase 3 right now. So when they were starting off working with us, they basically took it literally. They literally made a living community network analysis after they did some of that brainstorming that we just did with you guys. And you can see when, it's basically the same thing, color coding and all. So it's beat up because they literally took it out on the road with them. They went to different community members. They went to different community meetings, like Leanne mentioned, you could go to the Rotary. They did some of that. They also invited folks into their monthly city council meetings for folks to come in and give their feedback. They also took it around to particularly the faith-based community where they had some feedback and asked folks, can you help us fill this out, or have what we filled out, did we get it right? Like, do you have any thoughts about this? And as you can see, I mean, they didn't fill in everything. The one online is a little more expansive, but they got the community involved in this, and particularly a lot of the different clubs. One story that came out of this is that the faith-based community, there's a lot of different churches in Upper Chichester, and they kind of recognized, hey, we are serving some of the same kind of people and like overlapping services, and we're not really working well together, to be honest. We don't really talk about the work we do. We just kind of know what other, faith-based groups are doing in like the similar space. So they actually had a meeting, which was a big deal for them because that hasn't happened in a long time. Again, the collaboration wasn't quite there, for various reasons. So this became an opportunity not only for them to give feedback on, again, who lives, works, and plays, and the demographics of the community, and getting to know the community on a deeper level, but became kind of a springboard for the faith-based community to come together and say, can we collaborate better together? Again, this is not a magic pill. It doesn't mean everything's great, but it really allowed folks to come together and talk about how are we collaborating, how are we serving our community, and can we do it, can we do better? And so that was a really, really great outcome.
Yeah, and I remember even talking with someone on the team with that, was even saying, a lot of these, faith-based organizations, churches, and temples, whatever that's within your community, some of them are struggling financially, and they're trying to do all these different services, and if they could collaborate, which they did in Upper Chichester, it's still serving the community. It's not taking anything away from their particular organization, but it's also being basically practical, with the dollars that their parishioners are giving them. So I loved that. I thought it was great. But what I also love is that as you're starting to do this, whether it's formal or not, the things that you discover, if you can get more and more people involved with creating this spreadsheet. This isn't a two-person job. I know that there was a great discovery that happened in Carlisle, wasn't there?
Yeah. So through this process, through the community network analysis, Carlisle, PA, which is right outside of Harrisburg, they were one of our first communities back in 2015. They looked at the demographics first, because I don't think Who Lives, Works, and Plays was developed yet. So they started, I think, by looking at the demographics of their community. And then, they used that again as a launch point. They used the version of what you see on screen to do the community network analysis and kind of talk through all this. And through that conversation with the community, with different residents, they realized that the demographics only got them so far. There was a Bosnian population, a growing Bosnian population that was living in the community, that was growing, and it didn't show up in the demographics. So that was a huge discovery for them. And then being able to think about, well, how do we build trust with that community? How do we reach out to that community, invite them to be a part of the story gathering that happens in phase 2? Again, everything's not perfect. They did the best that they could with reaching out. But that discovery, I think, was huge for them and helped them realize that even though you will use the demographics in this part to help back up what the brainstorming that happens, that it's always important to talk about it and keep it open to other residents, because there's a lot of discovery, I think, that happens during this time. There's also, in Williamsport, I think it was, they discovered that there was a large low-income population, which they knew, but the demographics around that were kind of stunning and eye-opening for the team. And that also helped them rethink, well, how do we connect to people? What do we really know about our community? I think the biggest thing we hear is, I know everything about my community already. I think there's a lot of discovery that happens in people's communities, even though you think you know.
Exactly. Exactly. I always kid around with people and say, I don't care if you have been in that town since God has made dirt. You don't know everyone. So, yes. And I want to stress something here. Yes, we've shown you this worksheet, but it is not part of the Getting Started series. As I said, that's actually something that you would do if you start a formal heart and soul process, and it's part of phase 1. And right now, what we would want you to do is the initial part, which is the Getting Started. And if you're looking for the workbook, just look under the tab that says Files. That's just above the participant chat. You see Getting Started with Community Heart and Soul. Click on that, and you can download that. This very quickly is from Meadville, Pennsylvania. And basically, this is them doing this without the worksheet. So even if you don't have the worksheet, you can do something like this. And what they did, if you can see in those circles, is the networks. Some of them are the big networks, and some of them were subgroups. And then you can see the arrows that they were drawing, how they connect to different organizations within the community. And what I loved about this, I was there when they were creating this. They were actually at Allegheny College, and they were drawing on whiteboards with this. And there was someone there from the hospital who took one look at this and said, holy cow, this is like a roadmap for all of the different populations in the community. Can we utilize this? And the answer was, yes, absolutely you can utilize this. Heart and Soul is for everyone, trying to make all these different organizations work better together. Because they looked at it and said, this is the roadmap to vulnerable populations within our community, and helping them to see what services that we could offer them as the hospital. But even understanding the approach that they need to take wasn't top-down, wasn't, hi, we're from the hospital and now there's no trust. But instead, how do we utilize connectors to help people to come to the hospital to find different services, whether it's nutrition or WIC or other health benefits that they could be providing for free to different people in the community. So I loved that it wasn't just about Heart and Soul, and that this is something that you'll see spread throughout the entire process of Heart and Soul. So, all right.
Okay.
This is Dillsburg, and I'm going to let you take it from here because you've got some great stories.
Thanks, Leanne. So I'm looking at the time. I want to make sure we have the last 10 minutes for questions. So I'm going to go through this quickly. So one thing I wanted to mention, that Leanne mentioned, is that, You know, a lot of this stuff is more, to be honest, more fun in person, right? I mean, we can do it virtually, and we've seen teams, actually, like I said last night, we went through the worksheet that you just saw, that Excel document, using Google Drive, sharing our screens, and went through it with the community, and it was still great conversations there. So there are ways you can do this, but there is, you know, there's a part of Heart and Soul that is about coming together, and I know that, you know, given the pandemic, you know, communities are at different levels of being able to do that. The team in Dillsburg just started the process of Heart and Soul basically earlier this year, and they really struggled with how do we do some of these activities in person, can we? And so they basically decided to take the plunge, and they did so safely in the summer. Got a big open space. This is them actually doing the Who Lives, Works, and Plays activity that Leanne just walked you all through. They wore masks. They had, you know, sanitizer. You know, they talked as a team. Do we feel comfortable getting together in a small group to do this? And so they went forward and did it, and it was a great start for them. So that's something to consider in addition to some virtual activities. And again, you know, whatever, you know, is, you know, right for your community, definitely, you know, consider that safety first. Cameron County is another example I wanted to share in terms of, you know, where can this lead? Someone asked, you know, about the idea of, so what, you know, what does this really, what are some examples of how this has actually helped benefit communities? And so Leanne just told the story of Meadville, which I think is a great story of how communities can not only use the network analysis to better understand their community and figure out how to go to them and get to them and really start to build trust, but in addition, it can also help with, you know, getting funding. And in Cameron County's case, they actually started this process right around the time that they were doing a tri-county plan, comprehensive plan. They're a very small population, less than 5,000 people in the whole county. So they do their planning with 2 other neighboring counties in Pennsylvania. And the consultant for the comp plan realized that they were only getting surveys back, you know, sometimes people do surveys and focus groups for the comp plans from baby boomers and above. And went to the Cameron County group and said, you know, we're noticing with all your different engagements, here's some of the smaller engagements they did with asking people about what matters most. You're getting to much bigger segment of the population, young people, older people, everybody in between, and they asked them to be an official partner on the comp plan. And so Jess, who is the woman in the corner here with her red hair and her hand up, she is the project coordinator. They asked her to represent the residents on the comp plan focus group teams, and they shared data with the comp plan consultant. So that's a really great, that's another way. I mean, some of this data does not just go into a corner and, you know, die. This is stuff that you can continue to use and can really benefit your community. So that's been really great. I think they're still working through that comp plan as far as I know, but that was a great outcome. And yeah, so that's pretty much all I have. I know we're at 1:51, and I want to make sure we do have time for questions. So Leanne, come on back.
I'm coming. Hang on. Getting the camera up there. So, yeah. Okay. So, we've told you all about the exercise, Who Lives, Works, and Plays, why you want to do it, how you can do it. So, hopefully, you can download that workbook. And if you want more information, one of the things that you can also do is email us at info@communityheartandsoul.org. And just very quickly want to remind you that, because I know for some of you, you may be leaving us now. I hope you don't. Stay, ask questions, be a part of the conversation. But just want to remind you that next Tuesday, same time, 1 p.m. Eastern, we're going to be having the Sarah Leitner, one of our great colleagues, and another coach, Jenny Robin, will be joining us with spreading the word about Heart and Soul in our community. Basically saying, how do you talk about all this stuff? And what's the different ways that you can talk to people about it, and the different groups, and how you can change some of this. So I hope you're going to be able to tune in for that. And of course, the last in our workshop series is going to be with Eric Ortiz on our staff, and Jason Nices will be talking about community investment in Heart and Soul on October the 27th. So, and with that, again, if you want more information, just email us. Hopefully, you will also join us on our Facebook page and so forth. So, what kind of questions do we have here? So, yes. I know some of you were asking questions about the worksheet. Like I said, that's actually a phase 1 activity, and you'll have that in the workbook, and we send that to you as a spreadsheet. But it's a little premature to have that right now. Instead, what we'd like you to do is get that workbook, the Getting Started workbook, and try a couple of these activities in there. They're really easy. They're fun. We give you step-by-step instructions to that.
Well, there's a great question here from Emma.
So what? Yes. So how do you handle knowing how many people will come to the meetings? Well, some of that is that you're oftentimes taking the meeting to people. It might be a block party that you're organizing. And if you can, you're going to hopefully have somebody within that neighborhood, just like what Jen was describing that Andy and Diane were doing, so that they would know, okay, if we can get X number of people, that's how you know, to have enough food, for example. And yes, food is a great bridge to divides. It is an icebreaker. It's all those types of things. So as you do these types of meetings or what have you, have refreshment if you can do it in a safe manner. Again, in the middle of a pandemic, it might be a little dicey, but yes. So Jen, do you have any thoughts on that?
You handled it. I think, it's important to note that it's not always a meeting, right? And it could also be one-on-one or small group to small group. I think that's part of the process that a team goes through or that residents go through as they're walking through who lives and works and plays, and even the community network analysis is thinking about that. We always say that, we say this at PhD, it doesn't always have to be a meeting, it can be an event, or it could just be a conversation, right? So you might be having, thinking about it in a different way may also help you think about like how many people are going to be there, what's the right strategy, does it have to be a small group, does it have to be one-on-one, that kind of thing. Even at the community network analysis level, I'll say that. I think when you're asking people to get feedback on that, it can also be really important to really think strategically about how to get that feedback. I also really love the question from Emma about power dynamics. So she's asking, can you talk about what a Heart and Soul group needs to do to understand their own power dynamics with all community members and set up an inclusive process that decenters people and groups who traditionally hold power? And she's saying she's had experiences of being bullied in public meetings. I think this is something in Pennsylvania.
I'm so sorry, first of all, Emma.
And I will say that we have seen this in Pennsylvania happen a lot, and this is a big outcome. We did an evaluation of our pilot sites, and one of the biggest outcomes was it gave the team a more broader and deeper, and they acknowledged the power dynamics, whereas before sometimes we go into these processes and we don't. One thing I will say, and again, it's not perfect in Pennsylvania because these conversations are really hard, but even the residents that come together that decide to go on this process, first of all, we want a varied group. We don't want all local municipal people. We don't want, again, we want some informal leaders of residents, those that traditionally hold some sort of, quote, power position in the community. We want a mixture. And what they do is they talk about, and Leanne, I don't know if you've seen this in your stuff, but they talk about how they'll work together as a group and how they'll make decisions. And that is not always an easy conversation, and that can be a springboard for talking about how everybody in the group understands power. I will say, Emma, I'll be completely honest, the bigger conversations about power and what that looks like, say, at a community meeting and centering, different voices, I will say it probably happens more behind closed doors, but I think that's an important thing for people to start to build knowledge of that, because then that makes them more, there's an opportunity for them to be more confident in being a part of that process, if that makes sense. Leanne, I don't know if you have any other thoughts on that.
I think you covered it. I thought that was a great answer, and I know you guys have had so much experience with that. But I guess I also look at it and say, when you start out, and I see, because Daniel also asked a question about, true informal leaders, especially some underrepresented groups, rather just than the people anointed. And I say this with all respect. We've nicknamed them the STPs, the same 10 people, You know, it's like in other communities it might be 8, it might be 5, it might be 13. But it seems like there's this group that does get involved with everything. And in a lot of cases, thank goodness, because they're the ones that are making some things happen. But oftentimes that blocks people from getting in there. Part of the secret in this is, first of all, getting people's stories and sharing those stories. So it's not always about big group meetings. In fact, I kind of want you to get away from that thinking. That's traditional stuff. That is, hey, we're going to have a meeting and we expect you to come to us. Sometimes these are going to be small gatherings where people are going to feel more comfortable about opening up, but then being able to share that data. I mean, I love what they did in Thomaston Upson, Georgia, when they did Heart and Soul there. They had this kind of game where it was sort of like, guess who said it? So they shared data, and people had to guess, you know, what kind of person said this? You know, was it a man? Was it a woman? What was their age? What was their race or ethnicity? And how surprised they were that different people said different things. So sometimes it is about breaking down some of those barriers, and it is hard. It's hard for some people to hear that the reason why someone doesn't come to a meeting is because, you know, they're a single mom and they don't have the means to be able to come. But instead, if you think about that and say, you know what, if we are going to have a meeting, let's have daycare available. Maybe it's going to be the Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts or an arts organization that's going to do something creative with these children right there, and the parent can bring them, know that they're in a safe place, and still be able to participate. So it's thinking ahead, but the only way you can do that is if you're really listening to what people say. Now, I know that Mark has asked the question about what role social media plays in all of this. Jen, do you want to take a stab at that, and I'll jump in at the end? Because you guys have done such a great job with social media.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I don't know if I have a really great answer to this. I will tell you that all of our Heart and Soul communities do have a social media presence. And, you know, honestly, there is a good, Cameron County did a really great job with this. Because it was a county-wide effort, and getting to different municipalities was challenging sometimes, depending on weather. They get a lot of snow up there as well, so there are certain months where it's just really hard to get out to people in person. So they really upped their game with social media. And, you know, it's interesting that a lot of followers, a lot of people that didn't necessarily like talk on social media but were following the Cameron County Project. And at first they didn't know if they were getting any traction with this. And then COVID hit, and they became this place for people to ask for information for COVID, because to be completely frank, the local government wasn't really saying anything because they didn't know what to say. And Cameron County weirdly kind of realized they became the trusted entity because they were trying to invite residents into the process and seen as a safe place where people could go and ask questions, and that they had information. So I think, you know, Dave, I don't know if that answers your question, but I think social media can play a big role. But we've seen communities do many different things with that. Probably too many to mention right here, but I think it should be a pretty good strategy for sure for a particular population, you know, because not everybody is connected.
Yep. We have tips on utilizing some of this. Please feel free to send us an email at info@Community Heart and Soul. We are at the top of the hour, guys. We want to be very respectful of your time. So if we didn't get to your question, we apologize. But please feel free to email us, and we will send you what information we can. And thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate you. I hope you had a good time, and we hope that maybe you'll try a little bit of some of these activities. And don't forget, join us the same time next week for spreading the word about Community Heart and Soul. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day, and thank you, Jen, and Pennsylvania Humanities Council for joining us and being our partner and all the great work that you're doing in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Thank you so much. Bye, everybody. See you next time.